Popular memory frames 1692 Massachusetts as a quiet religious settlement struck by mass hysteria, but records reveal a society buckling under compounding survival threats. 3 years earlier, the English monarchy revoked the colony's original charter. Settlers lost their self-governance, land titles were instantly voided, and a temporary government was left to operate with no clear legal authority. To the north, King William's War was ravaging the frontier. Refugees poured into Essex County, carrying stories of brutal violence and placing a massive strain on local resources. At the same time, the community endured record cold winters, decimating crop yields. Smallpox outbreaks swept through the crowded, starving population. The Puritans did not view these disasters as a string of bad luck. According to their strict theological worldview, physical hardships had direct spiritual causes. Failing harvests, freezing weather, and frontier wars were interpreted as a military assault by Satan himself. By early 1692, the community's political guardrails were gone, replaced by a shared conviction that they were losing a war against an invisible enemy. The structural requirements for a mass accusation were in place before the first girl ever fell into a fit. Looking at this map, Salem's geographic fault line is clear. On the coast sat Salem Town, a wealthy seaport. Inland lay Salem Village, an agricultural community. These rural farmers resented paying coastal taxes, establishing their own church, and hiring a controversial minister, Samuel Parris. This rigid class and geographic divide created an environment brimming with suspicion and grievance. The terrain was perfectly laid for a localized panic to escalate into systemic vengeance. The ignition point arrived in January 1692. Inside the rural home of Reverend Parris, his young daughter and niece began suffering from violent, unexplainable fits. When the local doctor diagnosed the afflictions as bewitchment, the girls pointed fingers. The initial targets were carefully chosen, an enslaved woman named Tituba and a local beggar. They were marginalized outsiders who lacked the social capital to defend themselves. As the accusations multiplied, the newly arrived Governor William Phips established a special court of oyer and terminer, placing Lieutenant Governor William Stoughton in charge. Stoughton admitted spectral evidence. Accusers could testify an invisible spirit was attacking them. Because no physical proof was required, the defense was paralyzed. You cannot cross-examine a ghost. To accelerate trials, the court instituted lethal rules. Suspects who confessed were spared. Those maintaining innocence were executed. The judicial system was effectively running an algorithm designed for its own expansion. The law actively incentivized perjury, ensuring a steady supply of false confessions and new targets. With legal barriers removed, the contagion spread rapidly. Accusations jumped from the poor agrarian borders of the village directly into the wealthy center of the port town. Status offered no protection. Highly respected citizens, wealthy merchants, and devout churchgoers found themselves indicted. The court utilized extreme physical force to maintain its momentum. When an elderly farmer named Giles Corey refused to enter a plea, the magistrates ordered him pressed under heavy stones until he died. Social rank, logic, and standard legal protections had all evaporated. The panic functioned as a self-sustaining loop, tearing through every layer of the community. The system finally broke when the accusers made a fatal strategic error. In the fall of 1692, they targeted the wife of Governor Phips. Realizing his own household was no longer safe, Phips intervened. He immediately suspended the use of spectral evidence, dissolved the court of oyer and terminer, and ordered the remaining prisoners released. In under a year, the court hanged 19 people. One was pressed to death, and at least 5 others died in the squalid conditions of the local jails. An intense wave of cultural guilt followed the abrupt halt. 5 years later, prominent magistrates and jurors who had condemned the innocent issued formal public apologies, admitting they were sadly deluded by the powers of darkness. The sudden collapse of the trials demonstrated the reality of the crisis. It was a failure of institutional authority that armed frightened citizens with deadly legal power. Salem has remained in the American consciousness because it demonstrates how social anxieties cause a community to cannibalize itself once legal safeguards are removed. Centuries later, playwright Arthur Miller resurrected the crisis to critique the anti-communist hearings of the 1950s. Today, the term witch hunt remains a universal shorthand for weaponized paranoia. When political instability, social resentment, and corrupted laws align, the machinery of justice can be turned against the very people it was built to protect. Salem serves as a reminder that the distance between a functioning society and collective paranoia is shorter than we often assume.